Well, hello. I do as I'm told always. My name is Spencer Suderman. I've been in the networking business since the early 90s. And actually the first full-time job I had was working for Earthlink Networks. Anyone remember them? I was the 116th employee. It was a scrappy operation. The first office space was in an old medical building. And we literally had little hutch desks with computers, not laptops, computers, in what used to be exam rooms. Now think about that for a second. But I've been in this since the early 90s. I've worked at providers. In fact, I know many of the folks here at ISG from MCI days. I've worked at some large ISPs like Yahoo. I've worked at a large entertainment company. I've also worked on the sales side as a sales engineer. And I went into a lot of companies, I listened to their problems and said, and I already knew the solution before I walked in the door because I was the sales engineer, right? I was a smart guy, or I was a smart half of the team. I already knew the answer. The sales guy just wanted to know how many can we sell them. And that's all changing now. And I'm glad it is. And there's a reason I got out of that side of the business and decided to get back into the customer focus side because I think the power is back on the customer side now and technology has enabled that. So I think that's it for now. I'll wait until it's my turn to speak more.
Great. Thank you, sir. And Peyton really downplays his role. He is the principal consultant for network and technology transformation for Dieter's network organization for ISG. So you're getting a really great view of one of our best and brightest, one of our smartest technology minds today. So welcome and thanks for joining us on stage. Two other introductions, just some key people in the room today that you're going to get to hear from as we go through the day. Sitting in the middle towards the back, Catherine Rudd. Catherine is our West leader. She also has a magnificent background in technology and security. She's going to be running a couple of panels today. So, Kat, thanks for joining us. We're looking forward to hearing from you later on. And then sitting up here in the front, a dear old friend, Dave Muller. Dave and I go back to the days of Watts lines and black and white television and all kinds of things in the old network days. Dave runs network operations for Dieter's network organization. And Dave also is going to be running a couple of panels today, in addition to the contracting workshop that we saw so many of you at last night. So thank you guys for both joining us today. Just a quick public service announcement, if you will, to set the context around ISG research and the things that we're doing with Dieter and his network team and why it creates such a powerful statement for us. ISG research, our mission is to be the community of choice for both buyers and sellers of digital information and solutions. So we're doing research in the marketplace, both for the provider community and the enterprise community, across some 30 different product sets that we have in our research portfolio, and you can see some of the things that we do here. We have over 90 provider clients, a dozen carriers, and several dozen enterprise clients that operate as customers or clients in our research organization. We benefit from the various sourcing organizations in ISG doing hundreds, if not thousands, of sourcing engagements and benchmarks, producing millions of disparate and current data points that go into our data lake that enable our sourcing advisors to benefit their clients, enable our researchers to benefit their clients. As you can see in the blue band at the bottom, in our network tower alone, we have more than 3 million disparate price points that we leverage on behalf of our clients as a result of our engagements. And we produce over 1,000 tower benchmarks a year. What that says, Dieter and his team, it's a big team. They're one of the dominant, if not the dominant network sourcing organization in the world. They derive millions of points of data a year out of those sourcing engagements that allows ISG research to do the things that we do. So it's a very symbiotic relationship and really great to be here working with the network guys today. Talk a little about some network market trends, technology and transformation. We're going to take it at a little different level than Peyton did. Spencer's going to get into some the technical ebb and flow. I'm going to talk a little bit about some network and technology trends. We'll learn about the latest trends, transfer and provider trends derived from actual engagement narratives, client experiences, and our market research. So it's a little bit of a different spin, the things that we're actually seeing in the marketplace today and playing that back to you. How do I leverage the most current network technology for my enterprise? How are the providers addressing the technology transformation curve? We see some really interesting thing on the research side from the provider community, so we'll talk about that a little bit. And what are the sourcing strategies required to ensure you make the right technology transformation move? I want to start with a little bit of a story myself. For those of you that were in the contracting breakout last night, we talked a little bit about a client of ours, been an ISG client for 10, 12 years. We've done some 20 SOWs, global manufacturing firm, 300 locations, well over $1 billion in spend. We've done their network sourcing the last 4 or 5 times out, and I'm the client partner for that particular enterprise, given my history there. And we were having a conversation with our CTO the other day, and he said, Mike, we're getting ready to go through your next round of network sourcing. And we spent the last 10 years aligning all of their different contracts and technologies to be in a place where they can go out and do it all at one time. And Mike's typical reaction is, well, you're going to get me my 25% again, right? And I said, Mike, this is the first time that we're going to talk to you about something that isn't just tied to cost out. You have to be thinking about your technology transformation experience moving forward. You may get away with one more cost out transaction where you negotiate your providers down. I said, but if you are not addressing network technology transformation and where you're going to take your company as it pivots digitally, and yes, even a construction company that builds roads and bridges and dams and things like that has a digital strategy, in this case led by their CFO, which is a whole different conversation. I said, Mike, if you're not prepared to pivot digitally on the network and take yourself and get out in front of it, I said, quite frankly, you may not be the guy making that decision during the next contract cycle. And Mike and I go way back, and we're dear, dear friends, so you can have that very straightforward conversation. I said, but you can't just be thinking about cost out. You have to be thinking about where you take this the next time out. We have looked at, through Dave's organization, 18 months ago, I'd say less than 10% of the clients that Dave and Dieter were working at were considering digital transformation in the network space as part of their overall contracting and assessment process. A pretty small number. I think Peyton talked a little bit about how clients are sort of dancing around the technology transformation age, but how very few have actually got into it. Dieter mentioned that with some of the survey data. Today, Dave, keep me honest here, it's probably 75% of our network sourcing clients are having us do some formal piece of network technology transformation assessment up front before we get into vendor selection and sourcing processes and so forth that we go through in a typical ISG sourcing application. Again, those of you that were in the contracting session last night, we talked a lot about being prepared. You have to be contracting for tomorrow and what you're going to do through the next cycle, not just contracting for today. And we have those same conversations in our research practice with the providers. There's a lot of interesting things going on in the provider community, and we'll talk about that in a couple of slides coming up. But the providers have to be prepared. It's not all seemingly a bad news story in terms of what's going on in the provider ranks from an enterprise client's point of view. But there is a lot of work to be done, and we'll get into that here in a little bit. It looks like our slide producers have built the dreaded build slide, which turns 16 slides into 74 or something like that. So my apologies in advance. I hate that, but we'll get through it. Digital transformation across the business landscape, driving demand for network agility to support the workloads. Bandwidth requirements are up. What are you doing about it? The CEO walks in one day, reads an article, and says, hey, tell me about SD-WAN. Tell me we're already into it. Tell me we've converted it. Tell me we're saving millions and millions of dollars. We have unlimited bandwidth to do all the apps that we need to do. HR is crying, and finance is crying, and sales and marketing is crying, and those kinds of things. What are you doing to prepare yourself for that inevitable question? 10G, that's not 10G, the next wireless technology that's way out there. It's our way of saying 10 gig circuits. In fact, today, we're seeing as many requests for 10 gig circuits as we are for T1s as it relates to our enterprises responding with dramatic shifts to less expensive underlying transport. The challenge with that is it's not the be-all to end-all of solutions. You can't get to the end point simply thinking about bandwidth. So there's interim steps. We've talked about 5G a little bit. We've talked about some of the broadband capabilities and so forth, but you have to have that game plan, and this is just part of one of the trends that we're seeing. Enterprises are curious about the promise of SD-WAN. and NFV and all those technologies. I think we're beyond dipping our toes in the water. Maybe we're knee deep a little bit. The bleeding edge has turned into the leading edge. But as I use the example with my good friend in the construction business, there's a lot of folks that aren't really ready to wade into the pool of future technology. They're not ready for SD-WAN. So they're tucked in behind the safety net of their terrestrial data networks, the MPLSs of the world, and they're not moving it forward. So as I look at the enterprise community here today, what are you doing about it, right? We talked a little bit about it in the contracting seminar last night. It's one thing to be thinking about technology, you have to be contracting for it. Sort of we flip that narrative around today. What are you doing to think about taking it to that next level? And then the prevailing concepts about how the network is treated. The network, as Dieter mentioned, is moving rapidly up the stack. We've gone for, I don't know, maybe 10 years where the network was sort of a dreaded cost kind of thing. And oh my God, the CIO needs more bandwidth all the time, and what are you doing with it, and so forth. The network, with all things in the cloud, data center in the cloud, everything as a service, as you all know, the network is rapidly rising up the stack. The carriers are doing a lot of interesting things to react to that, and again, we'll talk about that in a little bit, but what are you doing about that as well? So Spencer, I think I'm going to turn it over to you right now.
Well, thank you.
I'll hand you that, and we'll get into your piece.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Appreciate it.
So let's talk about changing the way you're going to consume networks in the future. And I think of networks, I think of IT as a system. And I spent a lot of my career in systems engineering, well, really sales engineering. And someone once said to me, what does a sales engineer do? How do you engineer a sale? How do you make the customer buy at the end? I said, well, you don't engineer the sale, you engineer the solution. You make a system of parts work together. We did that as a kid. We all had Legos, right? Got a box of Legos and instructions, and you put it together, and usually it looked like the airplane or the car. And if you were a really creative kid, it didn't look like anything recognizable, but there were no individual Legos left when you were done. Look, Mommy, look how cool this is. And maybe it would roll across the floor, and maybe it wouldn't. And I think of networks, and I think of IT systems the same way. We've built them into this odd Lego of, we're not really sure what it is, all the pieces fit together, and they all are held together without glue, and we play with it for years. But you realize after a while, it's really not efficient. And that's all changing. Technology has enabled the business, I think, at this point in our history, to really achieve the agility and the value they're looking for in IT. And we've heard for years people talk about looking at IT as a strategic asset rather than a cost center. But no one ever said how you do that. How do you take the same purchasing decisions you've made over and over and turn them into a true strategic asset, not just a cost center? And I think that the time is here. And it's all the things we've already heard about already. It's writing your own software. It's using open source. It's thinking about different ways of deploying services in ways that make more sense and let you only leverage the parts of a machine, of a piece of software you need, and getting rid of the 800 other features that you don't need. So let's move on. The paradigm shift in networking is viewing the network as a decoupled overlay and underlay system. Now, we've kind of always done that. We've always said the overlay is the management layer. If we had an outsourced managed network services provider, they manage it all for us, and then everything below that was the underlay. And what did the underlay include? Your T1s, your Ethernet, your MPLS, your transport, the routers, the switches, all the technology. And the way, no one's saying buy anything different. Change the way you buy it into a different approach. So let's get into this a little more. So let's talk about the single management layer. It's not just an administrative management layer or a contractual management layer. It's the services that you provide in that management layer. So if we decouple the underlay into just transport, literally just the circuits, not even the connecting equipment. And it's very common to contract in such a way that your router or switch is tied in with the transport. And that's one of the big things that has to change. There's no agility in doing that. I don't think I have to explain that to anybody here. The agility comes in moving services to an upper overlay layer that includes all these different services you could possibly use. And a management layer, a single global provider. So let's move a little faster through this into what service providers are doing, because I think this is where it starts to get interesting. As SD-WAN became general availability for enterprises in the last couple of years, we've seen shifts in the way companies consume networks. Recently, I did an exercise with a client where we interviewed 6 different overlay provider, managed network services vendors. Some were carriers, some were simply master systems integrators who would manage everything else. And they all talked about their SD-WAN clients and how successful they were. But none of them could give us details. And the reality is, large enterprises are just now moving to it. We've seen a lot of traction in the SMB market. And companies like Talari and Silver Peak and Riverbed, and they're all names you're probably familiar with, have gained a lot of traction in small and SMB markets, and they're taking that experience and they're moving it into the enterprise marketplace. And enterprises are fickle about new things. Nobody wants to be the guy that puts his hand up and says, "Ooh, I'll be your first customer." It just doesn't work not in a big enterprise. It just doesn't work that way. If you have 50 sites, it's easy to make a mistake. Well, we tried it, it didn't work. It's easy enough to get ourselves out of this problem. A few extra bucks will buy us out. It doesn't work anymore. So we're looking at enterprises, or we're looking at providers that can provide that single throat to choke in a global environment. And if you can't have somebody manage the global overlay, it doesn't matter what the technology is. I know I'm not even talking about individual SD-WAN technologies. They're all the same in terms of features and functions. I've spent a lot of time surveying the market, talking, even though I'm not in the research group, and no, you can't hire me into your group, because I like being in the field and talking to customers and clients. But I also spend time talking to all these different providers and listening to what their technology pitch is and taking notes. And when I put them in a matrix of features and functions for all the different SD-WAN providers, you know what I found? There's like 80% overlap of features and functions. And how many features and functions are you actually going to use? Probably 10. So which 10 are they? They're all the things you know about. You're already doing it. Routing and switching, load balancing, quality of service, application identification, policy-based routing, and VPN. That's just a handful of things everybody's going to use. And sure, there's a few extras along the way. You might have a special need, a special configuration for your voice traffic or video, or a special application unique to your business. But you're going to use the same handful of features and functions. So it doesn't really matter which technologies. It's not important. What's important is finding a managed service provider who can work with you at a business level. This really gets back to what our keynote speaker said. Technologists need to be much more business savvy. They need to understand how businesses consume this technology. Because the technology will take care of itself. There's always going to be another cool, shiny, great solution coming down the road. I'm sure you get those calls every day from a new vendor you've never heard of. In fact, I got a call one day years ago from a company called Glue Networks. I said, "Glue Networks? That's an interesting name." I said, "What do you do?" He said, "Well, we're the glue that binds networks together." I said, "Well, that's not very creative for a name." I said, "Well, how do you do that?" He said, "Well, we created a management solution for your VPN tunnels." I said, "Well, how does that work?" Because today we have engineers who manually configure those. They're hard nailed up. They're not very dynamic. And he said, "Well, we automatically bring up and down tunnels as needed, as demand." I said, "Well, why would anybody want to have all these tunnels coming up automatically without any understanding of the underlying bandwidth?" And he said, "I hadn't really thought of that." So it wasn't a very long conversation. But it was interesting, right? It was somebody coming up with a creative solution to something we've done anyway. And by the way, we've had SD-WAN for a long time, right? I mean, isn't VPN and SD-WAN? It's a software-defined overlay network over an underlying physical network. We've had it for years. And what made VPN? Well, it was encrypted tunneling. It started with tunneling. We had a tunnel. Remember in the old days, I'll really date myself, I remember seeing networks with Apple Talk and DEC printing services. And people started deploying IP networks. How did you get this Apple Talk? So I'm from LA originally. And we have a lot of the entertainment industry. How long did the entertainment industry stay in the Apple environment and use Apple Talk? And as IP networks grew, how did you get Apple from here to there? You tunneled it across IP. Wasn't that really a software-defined network without even knowing that's what it was? But that's what we were doing. So it's much more sophisticated now. It's really clean. It's really a clean solution, and one box can do everything for you. It can load balance. It can identify your applications. It can do quality of service, policy-based routing. And it can take advantage of different types of bandwidth. So underlying your network is MPLS in most cases, and some broadband internet most likely. And maybe even some dedicated internet access you might still have over T1s or DS3s or other types of, or even wireless. And what's your traffic doing today? What is shifting network traffic? It's the movement of applications to the cloud. It's no secret. customers are moving applications from private data centers into cloud-based services, and it's shifting traffic patterns. So as you recognize that and you call up your classic provider, like I don't want to name them, but they all end in a T, and say, what do I do? They go, oh, we have a solution for that. We've built a service over MPLS that'll connect you right into all those cloud providers. So you can still enjoy all the benefits of our really high quality MPLS network. And those are all true statements, and they're very expensive statements. But if we're shifting traffic to the internet anyway, why not put in a bunch more internet circuits that are very low cost? Because we're seeing the shift. We're seeing in most cases over 50%, in some cases 60% of our traffic is moving to the internet to reach cloud services. So why send it through MPLS first? Why not send it direct? Why not, and if you have something that can manage it for you and manage the quality of service, that sounds like a great solution for business agility. So really SD-WAN is a solution for the business. It's not a solution for the networking team or IT. It's a solution that gives the business the agility it's been looking for all these years out of IT. And it now fell into our laps. And it's super easy to deploy, it really is. And you can have the single pane of glass, that holy nirvana of management. Well, I want a single pane of glass, and it's never really a single pane of glass. Well, that really exists because all of these tools have one management environment you log into, and you push policy out to everything. So you don't need a big group of people that are sitting there hand configuring routers and switches anymore. So it's really life-changing. Speaking of change. It's broken. There we go. So I want to talk more about how you leverage this. What are the levels of overlay that you can take advantage of as the customer? So the single global management layer, and that's a lot of the work ISG does. We talk to global managed network service providers about managing your entire network. And we're seeing new ones pop up who are specializing in SD-WAN that have nothing to do with transport. So we see the usual suspects, and they own transport, and they own MPLS, and now they're embracing SD-WAN, and they will happily manage all of this for you. And that may or may not be the best solution. And that's the key in all of this, is figuring out who's the right managed network services provider that works well with your business. And that's really the hard part of the work. Again, the technology is easy, and that's why I don't want to talk too much about this technology. It's so easy to deploy. Just pick one out of the bag and you have all the features you want. Some customers or clients want to manage parts of it themselves, or they want to have visibility into the firewall setup, or they want to have a say into how it, and that's easier to do today, but it's finding a managed services provider who will let you do that. A lot of these contracts are very sticky, and I know Phil's going to get into that a little bit more, are very sticky and restrictive about who can do what. But you want control. Control is there. The technology enables control. It enables the business agility you're looking for if you contract for it the right way. And it really becomes about that. And NFV, which is like the big buzzword, and what does it really mean? And I think there's a lot of misunderstanding there's a clear understanding depending on who you talk to. So I've talked to carriers that come in and say, well, we offer network functions virtualization as part of our SD-WAN solution. What we're going to do is have you put a white label box instead of your Cisco router on each remote site, and we're going to load it up with virtualized appliances, firewall, proxy, whatever you need. And you will now have your network functions virtualized. And I love saying to them, but all you did was take a stack of hardware and turn it into a stack of software all in one box. I mean, yeah, it takes up less space, but what have you really virtualized? They go, well, the whole thing. And that's where the conversation usually ends because they can't explain it. What's the real value of it? Instead of having that stack of virtual or physical appliances on each site, why not stick them in the middle of a region in a heavy-duty data center closet, cage, whatever makes sense for your business, or a carrier-neutral facility where you can connect into all these carriers, do all your business policy enforcement in a central location, and use SD-WAN to route your traffic there intelligently, however it gets there, internet, MPLS. Think of the economy of scale of having larger pieces of software running in big pieces of hardware in the middle of the country versus having it out at every site. Now, at a small amount of sites, sure, it doesn't make sense to do a big heavy-duty internet breakout like that. But if you've got hundreds or thousands of sites, if you're a large restaurant chain, you've got thousands of sites all over the country, it makes perfect sense. Why not have just a low-cost piece of white box hardware and an SD-WAN routing tool or routing solution and do all your heavy-duty policy enforcement in the middle somewhere? And it changes the whole way you think about building networks. And it changes the way you think about what happens when a failure occurs. And we already know if most of our traffic is going over the internet, and you've got 2 or 3 broadband circuits in a site and MPLS, and they're all routing traffic at the same time, and one goes away, we hope somebody tells you it's down. We hope your provider is proactive enough to say, hey, we noticed you have an outage, we're already fixing it, but did the business see a hiccup? No, because you've got multiple paths and they're all working simultaneously. The idea of failover, gone. No more hot, cold standby. It's almost packet by packet load balancing in ways that make sense based on your traffic. And I think that's a key differentiator in what this technology brings. And that's the last bullet point, is centralization of your network functions virtualization. Get all that traffic policy enforcement out of your remote sites. Make it super simple. So what are the carriers doing at the transport layer? They're changing a little bit more slowly than the overlay, but they're changing. So TDM's going away. In another few years, I think if you tried to order a T1 circuit today, they would look at you and say, no, we're not doing it. We will find a way to give you Ethernet, either Metro Ethernet, carrier Ethernet, but it's all Ethernet. Everybody wants to hand you an Ethernet drop these days, and that is fantastic. That encourages the use of traditional non-networking gear, of routers and switches, to stop being deployed. It encourages people to use servers running software, because what do the servers have? 1 or 2 Ethernet ports. So everything will be plugging in with Ethernet in the future, if they're not already today. People still have T1s out there. They will most likely not get renewed in the next contract cycle if there's a way to deliver a terrestrial Ethernet circuit. But let's talk about 4G to 5G, because I think that's really interesting. So 5G's here, it's rolling out. Verizon's rolling out consumer-based 5G right now. They're talking about it. And what can you do with that? Well, you can get rid of the cable at your house and get movies in faster, right? Stream 4K Netflix in, that's great. But that's not the real business value. The real business value is that 5G will at some point replace physical circuits, especially in outlying locations. So again, if you're a network of restaurants or retail stores or factories, there's gonna be a time where everything's 5G, even Wi-Fi. This is my personal prediction. In 5 years, there will not be too many new Wi-Fi deployments. Everybody will deploy 5G. And the phone in your pocket will not have 2 radios at some point in time, I think within 5 years. It will simply be a 5G connection. It'll be faster, will allow higher density and more services to be delivered. And why not? Why have 2 radios? And the opportunity with 5G is to build a network that truly lasts, decades into the future, because that technology has so much runway that's untapped at this point. Internet of Things, dense factory of devices, and you talk to a network, no problem. You've got the bandwidth, you've got the reach, you've got the throughput, and the density capability. So dynamic ports. It's very common to have MPLS be fixed for the life of the contract. Again, this is not an agile way to buy MPLS. Even today, as people put in more internet, we're recommending that they do less MPLS. In some cases, just go 50% of what you have today until you're comfortable not having MPLS anymore, which will happen. So carriers are responding by giving you dynamic ports. They're willing to let the port speed flex as you demand it. And we only see it flexing in one direction, which is down. The only reason it would flex up is if you lost all broadband Ethernet and that was your last resort. And that's a catastrophic situation, and there's probably bigger problems anyway going on. But the most interesting part is cloud connectivity. And this has been the theme and the driving factor in SD-WAN and all these network changes, is with the movement of applications to the cloud, we're seeing a shift in network traffic to the internet. It's a simple idea. It's easy to understand why this is happening. So proprietary-based networks like MPLS are seeing less and less traffic, and carriers are doing things to try to entice you to stay on it, well, mainly lower the price. And we expect to see the price of MPLS drop in the next few years as the shift to keep the traffic. Nothing wrong with that. And when it's in price parity with lower cost broadband that you can have 2 or 3 of from different providers, the resiliency is there, and you don't have to worry about, there's not going to be one big outage, unless the whole metro ring in the town blows up for some reason, and all bets are off anyway at that point. Okay, service providers today, and there's 3 big bullets across the top, and these are the things that are important to look at as we look at these global overlay providers. So the consultative approach. There's a lot of providers that will still come out and just say, here's our solution, take it or leave it. They're not really, and they think they have the answer. It doesn't matter what you're doing, we have the answer, this is the network you need. Sound familiar? This is the network you need. It's SD-WAN. It's the coolest thing going. Buy it. Many are moving to the customer-first environment now. They're spending a lot more time understanding what your business needs, and that's the theme of it all. What does your business need to be successful from IT? How does IT agility support your business objectives? And is it truly agile enough to be a strategic asset? Because that's really what you want out of IT. You want to support and enable your business, not simply be a cost and a drag, which is the environment we've been in. And here's the big one. Providers that are doing digital themselves are the more interesting ones. It's easy to tell people, we can support you as you move towards digital transformation. It's another thing to have a provider who is eating their own dog food. How does their network run? How do their corporate systems run? Where are their applications living? And what kind of networks are they using? So ask for the proof in the pudding. And with that, so before I hand back to Phil, do we have any questions on this stuff? I don't see any hands. Is anyone still awake? All right.
They're waiting for the networking break that's soon to follow.
Okay.
So
happy to talk to everybody later as we get on the break and expand on these ideas some more.
Why don't you click one more for me? So this is a bit of an eye chart, guys, so I
hand back
appreciate it. This will kind of where we'll finish, and I wanted to add a couple things to Spencer's point. We've been pretty hard on the providers today, right? So some of the things that Peyton talked about, some of the things that we've talked about today. In my research practice, I own a little group called Carrier Advisory, and this really interesting group of really smart people, all they do is spend time focused on what's going on in the carrier space. We do hundreds of interviews, both with the carrier marketing product people, carrier sales reps, enterprise clients, other industry resources, to create some pretty deep research on the carrier set. And I'd probably offer sort of 4 observations as I see it from the research side of things, looking at the provider community and the carrier set that you as enterprise clients are dealing with. I think the first thing, they have a wealth of great ideas and a wealth of great talent. I think sometimes we tend to think of the carrier community as slow, one step behind, and so forth and so on. I frankly don't think that's the case. While the technology is changing, this is what the 4th or 5th time technology's changed in our generation, at least back to the breakup. Each of the times that it has changed, the carrier has been slow to respond, but then they have come screaming back and caught back up. I would expect that to be the same thing here. The question is, which of the providers will react in which ways, and how will they move out ahead of the curve? We've talked a little bit about the management layer, the transport layer, and that last mile or that access layer. I was in Central Europe last week with 2 different providers who are very complex clients of ISG Research, one a traditional carrier, one apps and infrastructure, one of our large, big multinational French firm. Both of their presentations were heavily laden with chasing the managed wrapper in the network space. And it was interesting to hear it from the carrier, who's really not too worried about the transport. They're chasing the management layer, thought, okay, I can buy that. But what was interesting was from the apps and infra firm that you wouldn't typically see in the network space. They are chasing, because they have such a great managed capability, they're chasing that piece, and they don't really care who owns the transport either. So the challenge for that perspective for the carrier is as they are formulating these new ideas and formulating these solutions, which is the second point, they are not there yet, but they're going to come screaming back. So you as an enterprise client, you have to pay attention to those traditional providers because they're not going away. They may change a little bit, they may look a little bit differently, they may approach the market a little bit differently, but they're not going away. And they do some really good things. The challenge is understanding what that change in competitive landscape for each of those 3 pieces and who those new providers might be. Again, we talked about this a little bit in the contracting piece last night. So as you think about those 3 things, don't be locked into a certain set of challengers, if you will, because the carriers aren't going anywhere. So great people, great ideas. They are formulating their solutions. The biggest thing that we see in the marketplace that the carriers struggle with is the inconsistency of those solutions and how they're delivered to the field. You'll do a project in Indianapolis, and it's one of the greatest things you've ever seen, and then you'll go over to Amsterdam and do another project, and it's absolutely the opposite. Or two similar scopes of work, and you'll get two different sets of answers. So they're working hard on that. We see some great things coming down the road. We're trying to help them with that from a research perspective. But is inconsistency of sales enablement, I think, in my opinion, and I've been doing this a long time, is the biggest challenge the carrier set faces. And then that becomes your challenge. I asked a question yesterday, and one of the gentlemen in the audience, I said, who's happy with their carrier experience right now? A couple of folks raised their hand, and one fellow was courageous enough to kind of stand up and talked about how he managed their carriers and how they had open expectations, and they worked really well together. I guess the point for y'all is, as you start to think about it as an enterprise, do you really truly know your carrier? And are they bringing the right solutions and ideas to you? Or are they, my fourth point, and then we'll move into this last slide, are they caught in what I call the incumbent trap? The jeopardy of the embedded incumbent, right? There's this balancing act between we've been with this provider for 3 or 4 contract cycles, we know them, they know us, blah, 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 blah. But eventually at some point, if you don't put that provider on notice, if you don't introduce risk into that relationship, introduce some level of change into that relationship and force them to move it forward, you're going to run into that incumbent trap. So as you're thinking about your digital pivot, your networking strategy, and who you're going to do business with, and how you layer management and transport and access as you build your network of the future, make sure that you're really closely examining your incumbent and forcing them to behave in the fashion that is in best interest for you. And we've seen some really great things from the carrier community where they're in every year, they're chasing early renewals, they're trying to do the right things and driving technology. And then we've seen other situations where the provider falls asleep and here comes the advisor in on their white horse and forces them to behave a little bit. So think about that, but it's not all bad as it relates to the providers. There's some really cool things coming up, and we're very excited about what we're hearing. This last slide, again, a bit of an eye chart. We'll just talk through some key things. Splitting the management and transport layers, we've talked about that. How do you source for that? We're seeing more and more enterprise clients source the management layer first and then worry about the different transport pieces as a secondary approach in working with that management provider. In many cases, the transport provider it gives them also an opportunity to maybe jettison parts of the network that really aren't working for them, and you can find a better provider from a regional perspective. Is your provider behaving as a system integrator among all things? That's absolutely a key point. And are they able to execute on your objectives? Moving more into operations expense, we talked about OpEx a little bit. I think Peyton mentioned that earlier on. The more and more we drive into OpEx, the more flexibility we're going to have, the more ease of obtaining project funds and driving those kinds of things are going to be good. Renewals and cost out. How are you managing your renewals? Is it sort of, oops, I got 90 days left in my contract and I got to go talk to my provider? Or do you have a future-proofed contracting strategy? Again, we talked a little bit about that. Spencer talked about broadband and where that's going, so I won't spend a whole lot of time on that. And then we'll finish with a message around future-proofing your pricing and so forth, making sure that that entire contracting process is complete, not only from a pricing perspective, but from a terms and conditions perspective. And whether you're advised or not, are you using the tools that you have at your disposal, both from a public source perspective or an advisor? Recommendations for the enterprises, adding capacity and control. Are you leveraging hybrid capabilities right now to expand your bandwidth as you're moving through your digital pivot? Are you leveraging tools and capability sets that actually truly give you visibility into what's going on in the network? There are several providers that have really good tools. There are a number of providers that they just don't get how the tool set works, and that may not be very helpful for you. So again, if you're with a long-time embedded incumbent, do you understand the capability set that they're driving for you, the tools that they're driving for you, and how you maximize your visibility? As an advisor, we talk to clients all the time about focusing on core strengths. Do what you do best and maintain sharply honed skills on what you do best, and everything else find somebody who does it better than you and get it out of your shop and let somebody else do it. Focus on the things that you do best. Automation is important in the marketplace. We talk about it every day with our provider clients. We talk about it every day with our enterprise clients. Where are you on the automation curve as it relates to how you're managing your network and the influences that you can have there? And then last but not least, again, as we talked about last night, making contracting working for you. We'll have some materials both from these presentations and our presentations last night that will be made available to you guys as our guests that will give you some more direction there. So with that, I think, Dieter, we're maybe 5 minutes ahead, so we've got some time. Anybody have any question that's a burning question? Yeah, please.
So as everybody, there's a big shift from MPLS.
Oh, there you go.
As there's a bigger shift moving from MPLS to internet-based, do you see that MPLS is going away, or is it still going to be kind of like the backup?
So I think there's a lot of discomfort in companies that rely on MPLS today to suddenly to flip the switch, if you will, and say, let's bring in a bunch of internet broadband, just get rid of the MPLS. So if you're comfortable doing that, and by the way, almost every SD-WAN technology provider says, are you just going to get rid of all your MPLS? They're expecting it to happen. Most enterprises are not there yet. So our recommendation's been, for comfort's sake, if you want to keep MPLS, let's cut it in half for your next contract cycle. Just literally 50%, just down the category. And then bring in internet. And as you build comfort, you can reduce, maybe in the next contract cycle or contract review, you can reduce or get rid of MPLS. And that's part of the contractual flexibility that's important in the management overlay layer, is the ability to get rid of it if you don't need it or you see traffic dropping off on it, right? So this is really the contract magic we're talking about.
Great question, thank you.
But it's comfort, right? It's your comfort in how you want to approach it. And can you go to your boss and say, get rid of MPLS, and will you be updating your resume by 6 o'clock that night?
Who else? A couple more? The lights have really kicked. Anybody else? So we have our two favorite question askers. You guys, you were busy yesterday, and you're busy today. Thank you.
So I got probably have one for each of you. So Spencer, you were a proponent of a regional NFV, or regionalization of NFV functions. Is there a security risk associated with that if you don't have that all the way out at the edge?
This all comes down to network design. So if you're going to have this regional internet breakout peering point structure, then at the edge, we would expect that you do not let people go straight on the internet, use the internet as transport, let your SD-WAN router send traffic directly and only to that site. So essentially, you're VPN tunneling it to that site through any and all available circuits. If your objective is to still have people go to the internet locally, so then you do have a security concern. So this gets really down into network design, more so than architecture and security management, security requirements. But there's so much bandwidth available in an internet broadband underlay that why not just take them to this centralized policy enforcement point? So it's a deeper discussion, but you're right. I mean, there's a security concern in all network design, which hopefully is appropriately addressed by the management network service provider you work with, and having strong governance, of course. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, Phil, on your previous slide.
The eye chart?
Yeah, with the future-proof usage, I didn't really understand why you would want usage-based port pricing if the general expectation would be that usage is just going to continue to increase.
Yeah, fair question. Any of the smart guys on the network team want to take that one?
Well, most internet broadband circuits are, you get it and you get to use all of it. MPLS is a different story. We expect to see less and less MPL, and we're seeing it today. I mean, it's proven in capacity reports and usage reports. We expect to see less and less MPLS over time. And that's just the natural shift of traffic to the internet when you're hosting your applications in cloud providers versus private data centers.
Great, thank you.
The other thing that burstable usage circuits do, and it doesn't have to just be broadband, you can also leverage dedicated internet, but it allows you to offer digital workloads to your business customers. So maybe you only have a 1 gig circuit or 500 megabits per second circuit. They're going to add a new workload to your network. It might be seasonal, it might be something new that they're trying. So your network can expand without having to change, maintain that full TV port price. You can have the 500 megabits per second and allow it to burst up when it's necessary. And that's really, it's just another solution. So you don't have to be at full capacity 100% of the time. It's just a more flexible solution enabling agility.
Thank you, Dave. Appreciate it. Time for one more? No? All right. Guys, thank you very much for the time. Dieter, I think we have a 20-minute networking break. Is that? All right. So enjoy. We'll see you in the hallway.